So you'd like me to start, Martin?
Yeah, I'll introduce you, Peter.
Right. Okay. Thanks, Ben.
Welcome everybody to the workshop. We have three apologies: Councillor Troop and Councillor Miller and Councillor DeVries. Three items tonight is the branding workshop with Peter Fuller, Youth Leadership and Youth Advisory Committee with Kirsty and Joe, and Gorla River Flood Management with Jeff Tate. So, Peter, what we'll do is you can go through your presentation, and any elected members will put a note in the chat box. And when I see that note, I may just stop and let them ask a question as we go through, Peter, if you're happy with that.
Sure, absolutely, yeah. And roughly how much time have you got, Vin?
Well, the CEO has given you an hour, sir.
Right, no worries. Well, it'll probably take about 40, 45 minutes and then questions, if you like that. But with questions, yeah, we'll fill up the hour, that's fine.
All right, then, well, I'll hand over to you, Peter, and you can take us through your presentation. Thank you for that.
Great, thank you. Just as an introduction, I know quite a few of you. We've been living here in the Barossa for about 32, 33 years. My background was with the Stock Journal as a editor, journalist, and I started my marketing communications business about 27 years ago. So we now have an office in Adelaide, and some of you will know us from the Barossa Living magazine we did for about 7 years. But the base of the business has always been in marketing communication. So I thought tonight that I'd take you through to the three stages. One is just evolving some of these myths about brand and what brand is, taking you through the work we did with the Barossa winemakers brand as a case study, and then finally the process that we use. And then you're very welcome to ask questions. So the first slide, so Martin, you're going to flick through those? Yeah. So the most common misconception about brand is that it's a logo. And that's fairly natural, I suppose, because brands originally came from brand on sheep, the brand on cattle, the brand on anything that goes back to probably Roman times. But it was always a symbol. And so therefore, most people think these days that when you do a logo, that's a brand. However, it's much more than that. It's what people say about you when you're not in the room, is what the head of Amazon says. It's basically your reputation. And we say it's your unique story. And so every branding agency comes at this from a different angle, and some use more mathematical solutions, some use more other approaches. But for us, the one thing that brand should be is a story that you can tell over and over again. And so therefore it has to be true and it has to be unique. So the next slide, I just sort of whiz through a couple of brands that we all know. So Coca-Cola, we know the symbol so well. It was invented in 1886 by a pharmacist. His bookkeeper, Frank Robinson, chose the name for the drink and penned that script. And the drink came out of cocaine and caffeine. They took the cocaine out in 1903. But it was a phenomenon which now is probably the #1 or #2 brand in the world. And the words at the bottom of that are their values. And so if you go to their website, you ask Coca-Cola's values, that's leadership, collaboration, integrity, passion. I just can't see the bottom of that. I just need to set that up. But anyway, so the key things in every brand is you've got to have some values, you have to have some things that you hold dear, and you have to have a story. The next slide is Apple. So probably the #1 or 2 brand in the world as well. Started by college dropouts Steve Jobs and Steve Wozniak in 1976, who had a vision for changing the way people viewed computers. Until then, computers had been big, bulky things the size of refrigerators. They wanted to make computers small enough for people to have them in their homes or their offices. So their values, their statement was one person, one computer. We build products we believe in. We're here to make a positive difference in society, as well as make a profit. And then BHP, Broken Hill Proprietary, we all know, came from Broken Hill, 1885. and they're still going with Billiton, and they have their values of sustainability, integrity, respect, and performance. The next one is the one we probably all know quite well, is Pulse Grange, the most famous wine still in Australia, and there's a number of others as well. But it's got a great story. The fact that Max Schubert went on a study tour to Spain and Portugal. He went to Bordeaux, saw they were making Cabernet aged in French oak, came back to Australia, there was no French oak and there was no Cabernet. So he put Shiraz in in American oak barrels, mainly used for whiskey, and he was told to stop it, but he kept going, and then in 1952, Grange Hermitage started. It hasn't changed that look, that font, but it hasn't also changed the story since then. So elements of a brand are truth, authenticity, heart, emotion, purpose, values, beliefs, accountability, and consistency. These are just some of the things that make up a brand. So as you can see, there's a lot more to the brand than just the script of Coke and the apple of Apple. And while those companies may have strayed from their original motivation, and they may have done a few wrong things over the years, they still hold true to their authenticity, to their story. So why do you have a brand? Well, as I said, the initial concept of a brand was to protect your IP, to protect the fact that this was your sheep or your cow and no one else was going to steal it. So it improves recognition and understanding at the very least. So people recognise you, recognise your business. It safeguards your reputation. So if your brand is strong and your reputation is strong, your brand represents that. It manages the consistency of your communication. So you have certain messages that you create when you're doing a brand, and that creates consistency. It provides direction and assurance. It confirms your point of difference, and it protects the tangible and intangible value of your organisation. And by that I mean there are companies in the world at the moment who actually have a valuation on their brand, and it's a very high valuation. If you're Apple or Tesla or Microsoft, you'd be worth billions. Their brand alone would be worth billions of dollars. But there's also an intangible value, and that's trust. The trust that people have in you, and that is something that you just can't put a value on. So that's why you have a brand. Okay, so the next slide, I just thought I'd take, now some of you may have seen this, but this is a work we did a couple of years ago with the Barossa winemakers and the Barossa Grape and Wine Association. Now, they came to us because they had a look and a feel, and it's not completely different to what you see there, and I'll come back to it later and show you the original and see how it evolved. But they also didn't feel as though their messaging was very consistent and very clear. And they wanted to differentiate themselves from the rest of the wine regions in Australia. And having worked with them back in the 90s, I knew that the Barossa was always a step ahead of most other regions in terms of creating its point of difference. So after we went through a very long process of about 2 or 3 months, we came up with what we call brand guidelines, and this is what they based their whole branding on. And if you look at it now, everything that comes out of the Barossa Grape and Wine Association has this same consistent look, and it's given them a lot greater tangible value. So the next slide. So the main thing that we wanted to work on was the truth of the region. It's got a proud history. It's a multi-layered cultural region synonymous with fine wine, regional food, art and music. It's a proud history of marketing leadership based on unity and the pursuit of excellence. And it's time to reposition Barossa as a global brand. So the brief was that they wanted to lift the Barossa up above every other competitor region, if you like. They didn't want to be jostling with McLaren Vale or Coonawarra or Hunter Valley. They wanted to be playing in the same space as the biggest world regions. Very lofty ambition, and as it's turned out, they're certainly in that space. So they wanted to achieve a greater unprompted global recognition. So when someone says Barossa, they understand immediately it means a region in Australia. It already has the highest recall, but they wanted to work on that. They wanted to increase wine sales, naturally. They wanted to increase tourism visitation, and they wanted to revitalise the sense of a unified marketing purpose, which they felt was straying a bit with quite a few smaller groups starting their own marketing, and other large companies coming in here and investing from overseas. So the next slide, we created a vision. So this is for internal circulation, but it's an aspirational goal. It's not a tagline. It doesn't sit anywhere in the brand. It's something to tell each other that we are Australia's global food, wine and food region. It's a very powerful statement, and it has to be backed up by lots of support. So it was audacious, but that's where we started. Our key target audience for this, and they'd already generated some research to show that this is where they wanted to be, what they call NEOs, or the New Economic Order. So these are people in their 30s and 40s, professionals, very aspirational and very open to travel and new experiences. They have powerful social and business clout. They have elective, inconspicuous consumption. So in other words, they are quietly consuming and often are quite wealthy. They spend more on creating emotional experiences, so they don't necessarily want to involve things. They want something to boost them. They don't need to surround every luxury or overt luxury, and they do want beauty and design and quality and rich information, authenticity and provenance. This is the sort of people that we wanted to target with this new strategy. So we had to ask this idea of what's a global region? Well, global regions are destinations that attract experience seekers because of their uniqueness or their long established reputation for quality. So global regions attract these NEOs, or these high wealth individuals, who confirm their status by visiting them. And you'll notice that this moves a lot. So there's trend setting areas that people want to go to. So global food regions are Tokyo and Normandy and Italy, Shanghai. There's skiing regions like Aspen and Mont Blanc. There's boating and water regions like Lake Como and Lake Geneva. And there are also fashion regions like Venice and Milan and Paris and New York. So these are places that the trend-setting people want to go to. So what's a global wine and food region? So these are characterised by quality. So there's an everlasting top-of-the-line handmade quality products and services that can't be challenged. There's a rarity to it, so an authenticity and rarity, limited availability. There's aesthetics, so it has to be beautiful, elegant, timeless. Products are often the most expensive in their category that come from these regions. They have to provide an extraordinary experience, something personalised, something surprising, so expected, unexpected, and symbolism and pride. So the best from the best for the best. So it's a historic quest for perfection. So global wine regions are distinguished by their long unbroken history of growing grapes and making wine. So the most famous are Tuscany in Italy, Sangiovese, Bordeaux in France, which makes Cabernet. Burgundy makes Pinot Noir, Champagne, sparkling wine, Rioja is Tempranillo, Douro is Port, Marlborough, Sauvignon Blanc, Mendoza is Malbec, Napa is Cabernet, Rhone Valley is Shiraz and Grenache. Each of these areas have something they're very specifically good at, that they really focus on, and they do very, very well, and they really own. So the next slide is the Barossa brand pillars. So what we wanted to work on here were the things that really define the Barossa. Quality and provenance. I won't read all of those, but you can check them out as you go. But quality and provenance. We certainly have the highest number of wines on the Langton's classification. We have the highest price wines in Australia. Rarity and authenticity. Aesthetics. So it's a real wine region. We don't have as many houses and as many other interferences as we do, as you see in other regions. When you leave Adelaide, you leave behind the city, you go to a country region and you arrive in an aesthetically beautiful, distinctive Australian region with lots of vineyard. Price is also important. So Barossa does produce the most expensive wines in Australia. Pulse Grange, Henschke Hill of Grace, Torbreck the Laird, and now Yalumba the Cayley, and there's quite a few others. Other pillars are, can you just make that screen a bit bigger, Martin? I can't quite see it so easily. That's better. Extraordinary experiences. So the Louise in Seppeltsfield and Vineyard Cottages and Appellation and handmade wines from a range of small producers adds that extraordinary experience. Symbolism and pride, 7 generations of European, English and Prussian settlement, Silesian settlement, an unbroken 175-year winemaking and grape growing lineage, and proud, well-maintained architecture such as Seppeltsfield, St Hugo, Penfolds, Yalumba, Colin Grove, as well as our varietal excellence. So this is getting back to those other regions. While we make lots and lots of wines from lots of styles, we are the experts at Shiraz, and Barossa Shiraz has now become known as a world grape and wine phenomenon. When people say Shiraz, they generally say, Australian Shiraz, they generally say Barossa. So, and we also have some of the oldest continuously producing Shiraz vines in the world, thanks to our quarantine that occurred back in the 1880s. So from all of that information, we created the brand. Now, the brand before had those coloured squares, which were very, very good, and we didn't want to change that, but we had the Barossa logo sitting over the top of it. The Barossa logo had a little grape stalk on it, and I'll show you that in a minute. And so it was confusing and covering up what we think is essentially a fantastic colour palette, which represents both Shiraz, but also the sunsets and also the soils. So it was a very strong image, and we didn't want to lose that. So the next slide will show you, so that is, yeah. Next slide is the brand position. So Barossa is Australia's global wine and food region. It means that it's comparable with the greatest wine regions in the world, including Tuscany, Bordeaux, and so on. It produces authentic regional food of provenance, sourced from local farmers. It provides accommodation experiences, serene vineyard settings, and it maintains an understated community culture that is influenced by centuries of old European heritage. So that was the main brand positioning statement that we came up with, which is now used consistently when people talk about the Barossa. The next slide is a little bit longer, and these are messages that go on from that. So particularly this notion of grape growing and winemaking lineage since the 1840s. It was very important to make something of this because the Hunter Valley claims to be the oldest wine region in Australia. Coonawarra is also old, McLaren Vale is old, but through quite strong periods of their history, grape growing pretty much died away and winemaking didn't stop, but it got down to a couple of people, whereas the Barossa remained very, very strong in its winemaking right since the 1840s. Also, our unique food tradition based on the fermentation and preservation of produce, such as meats and vegetables and fruits and breads, is unique. No one else practices that in Australia, and it goes right back to medieval Europe. And there's a close community culture influenced by English and Silesian immigration in the 1840s that is still protected. So this is another thing that in a brand guide that it's important to have a guide to words that are really strong that we use. So global, of course, is what we really wanted to push, but rare, discovery, authentic, history, handcrafted, welcoming, words like this that build this story. And we encourage people to use that in their messaging and in their branding. Custodianship, provenance, quiet confidence, those sorts of words. The next slide are words we don't use. And whoops, we're going down in size again. Words we don't use. We steer away from big wine words that sound that put people off, and we certainly don't talk about alcoholic or jammy or overripe flavours. We don't refer to the Barossa as country, and it is country, but we didn't want that to be misconstrued as sort of country Hicksville. Sophisticated country is what the Barossa is, or sleepy, or crafty, or cheap, or even affordable. They wanted to set the bar quite high. We didn't use words like discount or bargain. So the whole idea here is to set a very high standard. So tone and style is also important. So you are trying to set the standard to be inspirational and aspirational, to be authentic, to be honest, to be real and open and sharing. So how does this play out in visuals? This brand card is a simple card that was distributed to all of the members of the association, and it basically is a summary of those key things I've just talked about: the brand position, the brand pillars, the marketing principles, and the brand personality, and those various words. So that's what you get out of a brand process. And then the rest of the guide is very much visual. So this is, and if we just slip through these reasonably quickly, this is the way that you use the logo, the way that you use the visual identity, and then we can use Barossa Wine Show. We can use Barossa Australia, but that's the font that you use. This is how it might appear on a phone, and this is how you use the colour palette and the use of the logo. This is again the logo size and how it might compare with another company. The next slide looks at how you might use the logo for posters or promotional materials. Moving forward, if you look down on the lower right-hand side, that was the old brand. So the Barossa was over the top of the colour palette. The new brand has the colour palette separate, which gives you that flexibility of being able to say Australia, which is the main brand, and then expand that into other uses: Barossa Food, Barossa Tourism, Barossa Wine, and so on. And then there's other differentiated, but the cross says these are the ways you ideally should not use it. Okay, so keep moving forward. The colour palette, reds and blacks and purples to reflect the produce, and then the typeface, and this is all pretty boring, but if you just keep going forward, you'll see these application and inspirations. So the style guide goes right down to how you should use photography. So if we're a region that's authentic and built on provenance and is global, we need to have a striking look about ourselves. And so this is the sort of recommendation photography that we came up with. And that's been very much used by certainly Barossa Grape and Wine and lots of the wineries that have captured this sort of identity. Very strong. Okay, so, and then we moved on to how we might apply the brand over the page to everything from business cards, pretty straightforward. Every brand would do that. How you might brand a ute. We never ever did that, but it's possible. And merchandise. So subtle, sophisticated, and not over the top. And these are things such as booklets and brochures. Now, we didn't want to be slavish and say you can't do it any other way, but we wanted to give recommendations and suggestions to people as to how they might want to use photography and the typeface and the colour palette to might deliver something quite striking. This is for a PowerPoint presentation, for example. And then moving forward, that's it. So just summarising there, it was a 2 or 3 month process. It came up with a lot of really good work. We worked really hard to pull all that together, and now it's given the Barossa something to use in a consistent way over the next 5 to 10 years. Probably it will be refreshed and renewed as we go, but at the moment the association's using it very well. Right, so the next few slides I'm going to go through is how we, as Fuller Brand Communication, come about doing a brand. So, as I said, a brand is a story. So we certainly don't start with a really flash logo or a design. That's the last part of the process. And this is very important because there has to be a lot of rigour and a lot of thought into how we build this story. So the first thing we do would have a scoping meeting. So we would start a collaborative journey, we call it. We want to work with people in the organisation that we're working with very closely, because at the end of the day, they're going to own it. And this is the way we do it with all of our clients, whether they're businesses or government organisations. So we need to be all on the same page. So we need to get together, review the brief and the proposal, agree on the timelines and budgets, project management protocols, and then the next steps. So once we've had that meeting and outline where we're going to go, the next step is to do an audit of what currently exists. So where have you been and where you're going? So we look at an organisation's marketing plan, at their business plan. We'd want to really delve into history and heritage. Now, for a small company or business, that doesn't take very long. For someone like a council or a region, it takes much longer. And you have to really make sure that you've got a good grasp of the heritage of the region. And the heritage of the Barossa is particularly strong. So you need to get that right and make sure that you really understand that. Then you start looking at some of your previous marketing assets, print and advertising, and also a digital audit. So you look at the website, digital marketing, social media, to get a real feel for how you've been doing that in the past. Then competitors. Now, for a business, this is really important. You need to understand what your market strength is, your vulnerability and opportunity. So we often go through looking at the 5 to 10 key competitors, their size, their staff, their turnover, if we can find out, their location, their market profile, or whether they're an employer of choice. In the role of a council, you may not have immediate competitors, but you've got other councils that are jockeying for position against you, and it's where you sit in the whole local government scheme of things. So that's part of that competitive analysis. Then so we don't do this with every client, but quite often we'll do an immersion where we'll undertake an intensive workplace visit where we will interview some staff, maybe have a couple of focus groups, and just observe the culture of the organisation. Again, with the council, your culture is widespread right across the valley, so it's not just your office, but it gives you an idea of how the culture works and how you express yourself. The next stage then is a stakeholder review. So we would want to understand the inside of an organisation in more detail. So we'd run interviews and focus groups and/or focus groups. Certainly in interviews with the C-suite, which is the CEO, your chief financial officer perhaps, the mayor and other leading executives. And then probably a focus group or two with the elected members. This is usually a board in a company. Then the next stage is a supplier review. Suppliers that that sell things to you provide a really good insight into how you're seen in the community and how you're seen in the broader scheme of things. So we don't always do this, but a lot of businesses like us to do this, to undertake phone interviews or a quick survey to understand how they're seen by the suppliers and service providers. The next one is customer insights. So understanding who your customers are, why and how they buy your service. So this can be done through a survey or focus groups. In this case, this would be ratepayers and residents with the Barossa Council. So you'd be wanting to know what private ratepayers think, what businesses think, and what not-for-profits think. And we have done this a few times in the Barossa. When we did the Barossa brand, that was we went to quite a few different groups of people to see how they felt BGWA was going. We also did it for the Co-op quite a few years ago when they were undertaking their big expansion. And it's very revealing. It's usually much more positive than people expect, but the negatives or the threats are the things we're looking for. And then that all comes together into a presentation on your brand story, your competitors, your culture, your products, your stakeholders. So that is then presented back to the working group, to the board, which gives you and us an insight into the next stage and a closer understanding of who you are. The next stage is the story. So our business is based on the background of writing and interviewing and writing stories about people. So the story of a brand is really, really important to us. As I said at the start, if you can tell your story over and over again, it must be true and it must be authentic, then you have a brand. So the next stage of this is you have a brand workshop. So this is an open, honest and collaborative look at who you are. The people we normally invite to this are the key decision makers, so CEOs, mayors in council situations, some members of the council, and maybe a few other key community people to look at the insights first of all, and then perhaps discuss some of the history of the organisation and the history of the region, then start setting some goals and objectives. Goals for us are 5 to 10 year goals. Objectives are things you can measure. And then a SWOT analysis, strengths and weaknesses, and opportunities and threats. Talk about your audiences, some of the brands that you might have used in the past and the brand archetypes that you might want to look at, and then some messaging. So that workshop is usually a half a day. It's a quite intensive process of drawing out of people both the good and the bad, and we put it all on the table to determine where the organisation's at the moment and where it's going. The next stage after that workshop is to dig down into the DNA. So this is where we might actually review and revisit some of the people we've spoken to, because we want to ask these questions. Who are you really? What's your personality as a region, for example, for you, for the council? Why do you do what you do? Now, you're obliged to do it as a council, but what really gets you up in the morning? You that work for the council, you that are the council, and all the ratepayers that are involved. What drives you and what go to bed? What do you deliver? And that's really important for a council organisation. What do you promise? What do you deliver? And then why are you different? Why are you different to other councils? And this is something that the work we've done with the local government don't really think too much about. They're there, they're in their region, but what makes them different to every other region? And then the proof point, how you'll deliver this promise that you have, and how can you shape that and improve that to become part of your brand. The next part is the brand name. You've already got a name, you're Barossa Council. You might undertake some competitor search or trademark search or a domain, but a lot of your work's been done in this area and there's no need or reason to change it, but you might review it a bit. And then there may be a tagline, something that is a short sentence or a phrase that goes with your name, which tells people more about who you are and what you do and what your brand is. And then the next bit is an elevator statement. And we always joke that this is the thing that you can say to someone you first met between the first and sixth floor to describe your company to a potential customer. It's about 25 words. Not everyone who works in an organisation should be able to say out of memory rather than reading it. And it's the simple explanation of what makes you different. The next one then, after the elevator statement, is the brand story. So where do you come from? What do you believe in? Why are you here? Where are you going? What are your dreams and aspirations? And particularly that business about what gets you out of bed in the morning. This is this heart story or love story that people get really attached to. And this is why people get attached to some brands more than others. The most popular brand in Australia for the last 5 years has been guide dogs. You wouldn't think it, you'd think it'd be, some other brand. And guide dogs just has a great story. And who can deny the cuteness of Labrador pups? But they are a strong brand because people believe in what they do, they believe why they're there, and they are there to support them. So that's the brand story. Then we start talking about your voice, your tone of voice, the language we use, the words we don't use. And then we move through to the presentation. And this comes right back again to the council. So all of your brand DNA, your name, your tagline, your elevator statement, story, messages, voice, are all presented back to your key decision makers for agreement. And generally, you've done quite a bit of work through this process, so it's not a great surprise. But if there are surprises and there are people that don't like it, they can certainly discuss it at that presentation. Then the final stage is the brand identity, which is the visual side of this. And so we start with a visual identity exploration, and our designers come into play now where they look at mood boards and look at what other organisations are doing. They try and bring on board all of the various things we've talked about in the history, the heritage, and the elements of, say, the Barossa, and then bring that together in a mood board, series of colour palettes, potential typography, and start designing rough logos. They'll also internationally benchmark it, make sure that it is unique. And then the next stage after that exploration is to come up with a couple of concepts. There might be a graphic device and a logo, the typography that you use, the colours, and you apply that in the first stage to just a website homepage or a business card or some merchandise, as we saw before. And then we move through to the next stage where we evolve that into a full brand identity concept. There's quite a bit of negotiation and collaboration, direction from the client, a couple of rounds of changes, and then finally we reach a sign-off stage. Then after that, we look at registering it, intellectual property protection, trademarking, copyright, web domains. We can do some of that work. You may have lawyers that you'd use to do that. And then we do the brand guide, which has all of those things we saw before. There's the colours, the typography, the imagery, your name, your tagline, your voice, all of the things that you now own as your IP that no one else can take away from you, which has quite a bit of intellectual value. Then the visual identity application. So now the fun starts and you can start applying it to your website, your business cards, brochures, EDMs, PowerPoints, merchandise, and then over the page onto other assets, executive stationery, the website homepage, the PowerPoints, brochures, signage, you name it. You can apply it anywhere. I think that's it. So, so in summary, it's a three-stage process. Insight, a lot of research to understand what your needs are and who you are and what you stand for. And then that process of creating the story, and then finally the visual identity.
Peter, I might just jump in and make a few comments. I guess going back a little way, back in April, we started talking about our town signage, how they've got tired and worn out. They were only meant to go up as interim signage, and they've stayed there for 20 odd years plus. So, and with that, I think it was flagged with us. There's more about our branding and our signage and all of those things, and you gave a very comprehensive overview of what's involved.
Yep.
I guess there was some of us, me included, that really does like the Barossa brand and the Barossa logo that we're sort of promoting around the place now. There's also this issue: is that something we try to merge into who we are, or are we distinctly something different in our story? And I guess whilst we're renowned for food and wine, and that's very much a driver for our region, but there's also the natural environments and all of the other things, the lifestyle, the culture and all of those things. So I guess, I think Martin might have pointed out, if you start playing around with brands, it can be very, very big. How do you see, if we were looking at trying to start this journey and taking into account that we've already got the Barossa grape and wine there, and I think, there's thoughts of whether we piggyback on some aspects of that, or do we have to be distinctly different?
Well, it depends. I suppose Barossa Australia has this aspirational view that it's a global brand now. And certainly they've done a lot of work in that area. They've done masterclasses in Hong Kong and China and America, and they've done some great work. But it is still very much, I think, something that consumers of wine would notice. And it may not resonate with all of the members of the community. There's a lot more to the Barossa, as you said, than wine and grapes, even though it's an incredibly important part of our whole industry. There's things like the Lutheranism, for example, of the community, which is a major defining factor. This Silesian, German, English mix, which isn't explored in any great detail other than as a background in the grape and wine. There's the food side of things that is touched on, but still has a lot. There's things like cooperatives and music and crafts, and the Indigenous population hasn't really been explored. So I think as a council, you are the custodians of a much bigger story than wine and grapes. However, you could be alongside the Barossa grape and wine, and in a very simplistic way, you could work together to create a colour palette and a look that's not dissimilar, using some other different colours. But I think the foundation, as what I've been saying, is we've got to get the Barossa Council story right. It's a much bigger and more involved and complex story than just grape and wine, and that will lead on to a much more exciting brand. Yeah.
John Angus, and then Leonie Boothby.
Thanks, Bim. Good day, everyone. Pete, just refresh my memory. Does anyone hold the copyright to this logo? And are you suggesting that the Barossa Council should adopt in part or in full or in conjunction with our existing logo, the Barossa logo? I see council's role in, and no one will find this surprising coming from me, we really have to be the guardians of what we've got and not allow the snakeskin belt brigade to come in and carve the place up. And I guess that's where we need to be able to give the character preserve more teeth, if that's what it requires. We also have to just remain steadfast in not allowing the towns to expand, because basically we will ruin what we've got. But so just explain perhaps about the logo as in conjunction with or instead of. Thanks.
Yeah, thanks, John. Yeah, I think we'd arrive at the logo and the visual last rather than first. I think it'd be great to sit down with some key people in council and get this story right, and interview some people and find out what does council really mean to us, and what does Barossa really mean to us. And for a lot of other people, it won't be wine and it won't be grapes. And then we might arrive at a point where, for example, if we were to say that after all of those interviews, everyone's wanted to see Barossa as a global region and a global powerhouse because of all the other things that exist, then yeah, I reckon we could start talking to Barossa at BGWA and how that might work consistently. But I don't think we should just jump into necessarily saying it should be exactly the same. However, it's a strong brand. It's out there. They're doing a lot of work with it, and I just think collaboratively and consultatively working with people in the community first heads off any claims that you say, oh, we're just copying the wine industry, or we're just part of that. Because a lot of people don't connect with the wine industry, surprisingly, and so that would be my preferred approach. But certainly there's scope, and BGWA do own, to answer your question, the intellectual property. They would have registered and trademarked that. But I'm sure, and I cleared with James the fact that we could go through this tonight, and he's very open, I know, to any consultative discussions. And just to finish that, from a consistency point of view, there is a lot to suggest the brands would look very similar. So we're not creating confusion. And I think that would be a good move. But I'd rather get that story right from the start. Yep.
Leonie.
Thanks, Bim, and thanks, Peter, for the presentation. So I guess in terms of process for us, and I am very pleased to hear you talk about the device, really does come at the end of the conversation. And obviously we are a different, branding consideration in terms of consumer brands and how we fit. So I guess I would love to see us go through a process where we do have that really good grounding initial conversation, with someone like yourself in terms of, what are the aspirations that we have as an organisation? Who are we communicating with? Who does the brand actually mean something to? And what do we want it to mean to them? So looking at different groups like our ratepayers, staff, grant funders, the general community, in terms of what we want to portray and what the brand does to actually help portray those things. And particularly from a cultural point of view for the organisation as well. So I guess in terms of timing for the work and I guess a chance to actually have some insights, things like our community planning process at the moment of having consultation on that, we might find out some some key insights from that process that can help us start to frame that conversation. But I would really love to see us start with that conversation before we even potentially even looked at a scope for what the branding work might look like, is really trying to work out to make sure we all understand as elected members, and obviously have key staff in that discussion as well, to really understand why it is we're having the conversation at all.
Yep.
It's probably more a comment than a question.
Yeah, totally agree. And I think that's what the point I guess I was making. You're a much bigger organisation than just and I'm not saying just, but the Barossa Grape and Wine. So you represent the aspirations of a whole community. You also represent some sort of unspoken things that we all sort of know about the Barossa, that may have come from the Germanic background, this sense of excellence and aspiration, and we think we're pretty good, and when we do things, we do them really, really well. We hold certain things really dear, like our environment, and like John was saying, our village atmosphere, we really want to protect. But all of that should be enshrined in a brand, so that you've got a reason to reject certain things because it's not part of your brand, it's not part of your DNA. We had an interesting exercise recently, or last year, with just as a case study, with Onkaparinga Council. They wanted to give a nod to some of their ratepayers who are down in some of those areas like Christie's Beach and some of the little beachside villages. So they wanted to come up with a different brand to Onkaparinga, but also a different brand to McLaren Bar. So we did a lot of research there, and basically everything points to the fact that if you're going to come up with a name different to McLaren Bar to describe that whole region, it's okay for Onkaparinga Council to be called Onkaparinga, but it doesn't have anywhere near the resonance of McLaren Bar. And so basically, after lots of consultation, they dropped the idea because it just would have confused a lot of people. The McLaren Bar is a well-recognised global region. Now, we're lucky because people that started the Barossa BGWA also went for a tourism region called Barossa and a council called Barossa. So we're really, really lucky. And I think council have a big role to play here now, fleshing that out with all the cultural characteristics that we really all love about the region. And there will be some really challenging conversations. As I said, the Indigenous side of this hasn't really been ever sort of recorded or discussed in any great depth. And as we can see in the community at the moment, people are going to ask a lot more about that in the future. So what is our heritage in that area? What do we do in that? What do we believe? Change, all of those things need to be enshrined in that brand.
Russell.
Peter, thanks for a great presentation. You probably know I've got a little bit of skin in that game, yeah, and have done for some time.
Yeah.
Just for a moment, could you pretend that you're not seeking our business?
No.
and you're looking at our website and the look and feel of our paperwork and the logo that we're using at the moment. If you were just an outsider, and also pretend you don't live in the valley, do you think it's tired, and do you think it's in need of a refresh at the very least? Thanks.
Yeah, well, I think it does, and I think you all know that. I mean, it's come from a point where it was a bit obvious to have the hills and the vines, and we all know that the number of things you see around the Barossa that are bunches of grapes, grapevines, are just it's a bit tired. And I think that just happens, and these things evolve over time, and it served its purpose. But I would think that, again, going through that storytelling, we would come out of this understanding that Barossa is a very aspirational and forward-thinking sort of region that wants to be seen almost as a world-class region, like its wine part. And so I think we need something visual that is strong enough for that. Now, one of the issues you'll have, of course, is the economic side of rolling this out. And we did some work in Unley a few years ago where it got to the point, we did all the messaging, we did the story, we did everything. And then at the final point, they just couldn't let go of their logo because it was that little logo of I think it's an elm tree, was on every street sign around the region. And it would have cost them an absolute whack to go and change all those street signs. So they shied away from it. So this is one of the things you'd have to work through. I think typography is a much simpler way to go for those sorts of things, and don't start entering into using logos on too much signage because you're locked in for a long time. But they're all the considerations we talk about in that visual stage. But yeah, I think it's a bit tired, Russell. I think as a sophisticated region that's probably getting more growth than any other region in the state, and it's quite a wealthy region compared to many others, I think, we deserve to stand up a bit taller.
Martin and then Tony Hearn.
Thanks, Bim. I just want to reiterate that the driver here was about a strategic conversation about how we align the organisation to the regional aspirations, to grow our economy, to grow our jobs, to grow our environment, to grow our outcomes. And there's no ongoing commitment through this, and Peter and Catherine have been fantastic. This is a rounding about having the next conversation about what we are going to do with this. I agree with Peter that there's some great opportunities, and I liaise with James all the time, and there's no preconceived particular outcome, but this is about getting the base of what branding is about, and branding, which is clear in the presentation. The logo is the last bit, and the story is what we got to do, and that links with what Leonie's saying with the community plan, the corporate plan work, the advocacy plan work. So there's an ongoing conversation, I think, to happen for the next 6 to 12 months. We're not going to launch. I don't think we're going to launch into a massive branding exercise, but if we can slowly work towards that, and even some of the stuff Peter's talked about, we actually have developed through the website project over the last 6 months. And I agree with what Peter just said. What we've actually learned through the website project is just how our story is falling off the long wagon of what is contemporary, what is about helping sell our community to the world. And I think the interesting thing, you've talked about Oncopring, you've talked about Unley, and they're all great councils. Please don't get me wrong, because this is publicised. But we are the Barossa, so let's sell it to the world.
Sure.
Tony.
Yeah, thanks, Bim. Thanks, Peter, for a great presentation. There's a lot that one could say, and I agree with the comments that Martin's just done. But we're going through a revamp of our website currently, and I guess yes, the old grape scenes or vineyard scenes are certainly a little bit old hat these days. The thing that concerns me is that we're here. We're not aiming to go worldwide, I don't think, with what we're doing, because there's so many versatilities here in the Barossa Valley. The BWGA, etc., do all of that. So, do you see that there's a lot of value, in us proceeding down this way? Do you think that we need to be advertising ourselves far and wide, or just in the state itself, and then these others can tag along as well? Just wanting to know how you view that idea.
Look, to me, it's not. This isn't a marketing strategy per se, because you are an organisation. You're there. You exist to do a certain job, and you don't really have to sell that to people. You do have to sell certain messages about your reliability and your trustworthiness and so on, and that's all part of branding. But no, it's not necessarily saying you're the biggest council in Australia. That wouldn't be possible, or the best. And there's some very well-branded councils in Australia that look fantastic. But I think the main thing here is confidence. So if you know who you are, and you've really got this recorded and written down, and it's a hymn sheet, if you like. We always used to say this about the Barossa when we used to go away. We all sing from the same hymn sheet. And that's an incredibly powerful thing. For example, I remember going to the UK with 60 winemakers, and it was just so disarming for the consumers to see someone from, say, Peter Scholl's pouring Charlie Melton's wines, or someone from Penfolds strolling over and pouring Jeff Strapel's wines. And they couldn't believe it. They said, "We've never seen anyone do this. Ain't you guys competitors?" And they said, "Well, we are, but we're Barossa first." So I think that sort of spirit that's been going on now for 20 to 30 years with the winemakers is also the way we all feel as a region. We're very united, we're very together, but have we ever said that in any meaningful way in any one place? And really the council's the place to do that. Yeah, so that's what it's about. It's not really selling it outside, it's a confidence and a statement about who you are. And I just wanted to reaffirm with Martin too, yeah, that this is simply a little project to help you define brand. And if the work is put up for tender, which I expect it will be, and we'd be happy to pitch for it, but I'm sure other agencies will as well. And there's no holds barred. I'm, love the Barossa and love to work with it, but yeah, we believe it should be an open process.
Thanks, Peter, and thanks for your presentation. I guess the important thing that I always see here is that mere fact is that when you're in a crowd or in the room or somewhere and you say you're from the Barossa, nothing gives me more pride than to say I'm the mayor of the Barossa. It doesn't mean the mayor is the important thing. It's the Barossa is the important message that we're trying to get and keep to the forefront. And I think that's critical as part of our story and broadening it out across all those aspects that you've touched on. So thanks for your presentation, and
no worries. Glad to help. We can all go and have a glass of red now. Well, I will.
You will, we won't.
Thanks, Peter.
Good on you. Thank you all for your time.
We'll now move on to the Youth Leadership presentation and the Youth Advisory Committee. I've got Joe, you down, and Kirsty. Is my sheet right, or is it just Kirsty?
It's pretty much just Kirsty, but I'm standing by.
Okay. Okay. Thanks, Kirsty. Jump in.
Thanks, Bim. Firstly, just like to apologise because Brooke was going to be presenting with me tonight. She's done a lot of work in this area, but unfortunately she's sick. So I will do my best, particularly in terms of answering questions at the end. And I'm just going to share my screen. Oh, 2 seconds. Hopefully this works. Hang on, sorry. I'm working on 2 platforms. Share. Well, I don't know if it's going to let me, Martin.
That's fine. I can do it from here, Kirsty.
Oh, hang on a second. Nope, I think I've got it. Hang on a second. Can you let me know if you can see that now?
Yep, that's correct. Yep.
Excellent. All right. Okay, so tonight I'm presenting in terms of a proposal that we would like council to consider in terms of a Barossa Youth Leadership Program. We were asked, I think most of you will remember, to kind of look into different options in terms of a youth leadership program instead of what we currently have, which is a Youth Advisory Committee. And I've been working quite closely with Tea Tree Gully over the last 12 months to get as much information as we could on their program. So currently we have a Youth Advisory Committee, which a number of councils still have. The Youth Advisory Committee is members aged 12 to 25. It's been in operation at our council for just over 10 years. It is once a month meeting for young people, and they deliver programs such as Youth Week, community events and competitions. Currently, the Barossa Council completely funds all the YAC activities, coordination and all of the required resources. At present, we only have 6 members. So we can have up to 15 members on the committee at one time. Some of the programs and events that YAC have done over the years, and I won't go through all of them obviously, but probably our biggest one that we do is Night Skate during Youth Week, where we get around 300 young people, and that is helped. The resourcing is help provided by the Youth Advisory Committee. Predominantly, mostly the YAC at this time utilises that space and event to talk to other young people and get some advice on, different areas of of events, etc., that they'd like to see in the community. Again, there's a whole range of other things there that we've done over the last 10 years that you will see. I was a youth advisor, I was a youth coordinator before I had this job. So yeah, some of those were during my time. I guess what we've come to realise is there's quite a few limitations to a youth advisory committee now, not just in our council region, but definitely it's a trend among a lot of councils to look at how we're engaging with young people, what that means, and what young people really want to get out of, I guess, a leadership program or a connection with council. So some of the limitations that we've found, not just with that in our own youth advisory committee, but also having conversations with T2 Gully and all of their research that they've done, it generally doesn't tend to represent the greater youth population, and particularly in the Barossa, what tends to happen is it becomes a kind of friendship group. So not that they're creating friendships once they get into YAC, because that's fine and very much encouraged, but they're kind of bringing along friends en masse, and that becomes a bit of a clique. They definitely seem to have more of a events focus, and that's probably a traditional kind of way that YACs have run in terms of how young people engage further with other young people in the community. There's lots of great ideas about events, but there is a bit of a lack of commitment and help and support in those events. And that probably also stems from not so much a foundation of building that kind of leadership and drive within our young people, more just around asking them to provide us with ideas on what they think young people might want to see in terms of events in the Barossa. Again, so that leads into obviously limited leadership and learning opportunities. We always struggle to keep our numbers up with the Youth Advisory Committee, and that has dropped off significantly during COVID. Really what we're finding, and this actually has been happening for quite a while, even probably in my time, it tends to just be kind of a social gathering. Food and drink is provided and not much focus on any kind of skills or projects. That is not just our youth advisory, that has been the case across most councils that we've spoken to. So looking into a change of direction, like I said before, the youth leadership programs from Tea Tree Gully and Adelaide Hills have been implemented over the last couple of years and have been highly successful. And we've been obviously doing a lot of work with Tea Tree Gully, as I said before. We have done some leadership opportunities through the youth coordination, but they were kind of one-off hit ones. So young people, not from YAC, but young people just from the community could apply to go to Halligan or YWCA, She Leads High, but they are more like a one-off conference and then they go on their way. So just looking at how we can kind of combine a whole range of things together into a well-packaged leadership program. So Tea Tree Gully, and I believe Tea Tree Gully presented to a number of, well, at least to the mayor and a number of elected members last year in terms of what they were doing. They've had some really big kudos in the LGA in terms of what they've got. So the leadership program that they've implemented has a focus on group learning and tailored outcome-based sessions. The program promotes a co-led and co-design model with the opportunity to increase knowledge and awareness, expand networks, gain valuable practical skills to support future leadership journey. So basically what they have done very successfully is obviously has some frameworks around what would be learned within a term, but was much more driven in terms of what young people were wanting to gain out of those areas of discussion. And then moving on, it becomes a mentoring program for the next group to come through in the following year. It runs from January through to December each year, so in line with school years, and has been very successful. So lots of things have gone on with TTG, and obviously I think they're going into their third year now with the mentorship program as well. And Brooks provided a number of activities and photos of what the TTG group have done over the past couple of years. So some of the benefits for a youth leadership program such as this, obviously there's a lot of research to show that it increases confidence, self-esteem, internal motivation of young people. It supports them to apply their leadership skills in everyday life, school and work environment. It connects them with networks of like-minded people and not just within their council region, but further afield, and I'll talk a bit more about that in a little bit. It builds their self-awareness, self-acceptance and self-advocacy skills. They learn how to positively influence and lead others. It assists them to develop and deliver council events, which we still require. And there's opportunities for lots of partnerships in terms of disability services, Foundation Barossa and Barossa Suicide Prevention Network, all of which Brooke and actually Kathy Troop as well have been having conversations with a number of those organisations in terms of how that could roll out and be connected in for some of the other youth programs that are happening around the valley and further afield. So the Barossa Youth Leadership Program would be very similar to the TTG program in its delivery. So it would be a weekly 2-hour leadership session throughout school terms. The program will comprise of a maximum of 11 members in the first year. And we've particularly chosen no more than that just to ensure that we can monitor what we're doing and ensuring that we're getting the best outcomes. And then we'll look at further developing that. I think TTG have a maximum of 20 participants now, but they started with 10. So the proposal at the moment is that we'd invite students from the Europe to High Faith Lutheran School, but not necessarily just around those two schools, but they are the ones that we've spoken to in terms of potentially being able to have SACE credits attributed to this program, which I've said down further. Definitely it would be open to young people aged 15 to 22 years as opposed to the 12 to 25 years that we've had in the past for YAC. And that 12 to 25 years was set by the Office of Youth when they used to actually fund youth advisory committees. What we found in terms of the broader age range is it's very hard to get the younger of that scale engaged in a really meaningful leadership program, and the older cohort have already surpassed what they think themselves as in terms of a youth. So the 15 to 22 age bracket is a much more considered age bracket in terms of what we'd be providing and kind of how we're pitching that to young people. It would be that young people in that age range that live, work or have school in the Barossa would be encouraged to apply. The program would be free for young leaders, and we've done a full budget on that. We'll have focus on group learning and tailored outcome-based sessions. The prospective young leaders would need to complete a formal application, which would be reviewed by a panel for decision making. Now, part of that suggestion is that we have at least one elected member on that committee to go through that formal application process, potentially 2 or 3, potentially 2 other people, possibly Brooke and myself, to go through all the applications and ensure that there's a transparency in how we're making a decision in terms of approval for application. Within that application, and Brooke's done quite a bit of work on this as well, and with help from TTG, it would have a number of questions that the young person would have to answer in terms of what they were looking for in terms of youth leadership, what they felt they would get out of it, what they're currently doing, where their interests lie. So there would be a definite considered application process in terms of that. Also, during school holidays, young leaders will either be involved in an excursion or function, and that would be linked to the previous term's theme that they would work on. So that would include, for example, hosting a market or fundraiser in terms of the theme, or attending an empowerment conference. There's a number that we have on the list that we would suggest that the young people do, and TTG do as well. And the young leaders would graduate at the end of the year, and they'd have the option then of becoming peer mentors in the following year's program. And that part of the program in particular has been really, really successful with Teacher Gully. So I think they're averaging around 3 mentors coming out of the program from one year to the next, and those mentors stay for the whole year, encourage and empower the next group that are coming through, and certainly help with the theming for the following year. Whereas obviously for the first year, we'd be suggesting some things which are noted down below. And then, of course, that would then go to discussions in terms of what that would look like and focus on in each term. So the themes that we're proposing currently are environment for theme 1, and that could go from recycling, biodiversity, climate change, sustainability, etc. The second term around giving back, and that could be volunteering, reconciliation, different types of fundraising. The theme for the third term is mental health. Obviously, that speaks for itself in terms of what that might look like. And the term 4's theme would be skill development. So, helping encourage them for public speaking, potentially cost of living sessions, resume writing, and the like. So as you can see, we've done quite a bit of work in terms of what the proposed weekly sessions would be like, and I've just tried to drill it down a little bit for you tonight. The proposal is that it'd be a 4 to 6 p.m. every week of the term, potentially at Neuropta Council. There is a suggestion for Barossa Bush Gardens, depending on the theme. So obviously back up before when we were having a look in environment. It'd be interactive, informative and student-led. There'd be the use of videos, so TED Talks, potentially craft materials if it had a craft theme. There'd be youth leadership pack resources, and there'd be talks and presentations from industry leaders and guest speakers. And my encouragement would be that we attempt to have either executive council or elected members involved in some of those guest speaking if they had a particular interest in it. For that theme, really encouraging the kind of connectivity from this group into council, not just from a potential future leader program in terms of wanting to get young people interested in decision making from a elected member base, but also the potential to encourage them to both consider working at council at some stage, and also just to give a broader view of what we actually do at council. So a lot of, and you'll probably be aware of this, a lot of feedback lately around some misconceptions about what council actually does or doesn't do, and just trying to, encourage that understanding of, the broad range of services and advocacy that we actually provide in council. So in January, before school starts, there will be an intensive team building day, and that will be organised where the young leaders get to meet each other and shape the program content in terms of the themes. And like Brooke said here, we're creating examples of sessions throughout the year, but ultimately we want the young people to lead their own development and learning as part of their leadership development. So an example of a weekly session could look something like this. For example, say 4 to 4:30, welcoming an overview of the session, get the conversation going and a quick recap about the program and introductions. 4:30 to 5:15, critical thinking conversation, debrief about COVID-19. So this is the very first session that we would have starting off the program. And then there's a few activities, a break. And then the second part of the evening would be planning in small groups around what's going to occur for the year. And then a bit of a reflection and setting weekly tasks. So there will be tasks that will be set for the group that will need to be completed and discussed at the following session. And obviously we'll have some resources provided to the young people while they're there. So in terms of resourcing, we've done quite a lot of budgeting in terms of what that might look like with our current budget. And as I've said on here, for this financial year, if it was to be approved or there was interest in going ahead, there wouldn't be any budget implication. We've obviously underspent on our youth budget at the moment due to COVID restrictions. So we could actually do this service delivery until the 6-month process starting in January. What has become apparent is if we want this to succeed, there is a need for a full-time youth project coordinator. So currently we have a 0.6 youth coordinator, and from all the feedback we've got and all of the work we've done with TTG and discussions with Adelaide and a number of other areas, there is a need for a full-time person to ensure that the young people are getting everything they need from the program and developing, because it's a youth-led service delivery, you need to be reactive on the ground to get that information to them and meaningful for the whole time. So in the 2021 financial year, which is a bit of an indicative cost, we're looking at probably an increase of around 9,500 in the overall budget. That's ensuring that we still have money in the budget to do, at the moment, Schoolies Bus, the commitment to Drive My Future, and a Youth Week budget, which has always been separate from the Youth Advisory Committee and probably gets our best turnout. There are some additional resources that we provided, which we'd encourage you to go and have a look at. Just probably, just note, because Kathy Truth did send an email earlier on before the meeting, which I managed to have a look at, which had some really great comments in there and some questions. There was a question just raised in terms of, I'll just actually take this off and go back to my screen now, in terms of the potential for making transport available to any young people that may have the inability to access the program. So, and once if I present this obviously as a debate agenda to council, there is a full budget attached to that you can see. We've allocated some funding in that overall budget in terms of helping young people with transport if required. There's not enough in the budget to be able to do every single person coming for every session, but we certainly have money in the budget for each term to help those young people that may live further afield or obviously disadvantaged. I guess what we don't want is to exclude a young person because of that and making it impossible for them to be able to attend the sessions. The other sessions in terms of conferences that they go to in Adelaide, and the end of year celebration actually occurs with the TTG group. They get to meet other young people that have done similar leadership programs. Buses are organised for them to get there and back as well. There was a discussion also Kathy raised in terms of whether we could open that up to other high schools, so potentially Xavier, potentially Birdwood, and I'm certainly not opposed to that. I think what we would have to consider for this coming year is the time frames that takes in terms of negotiating with the schools for the allowance of SACE credits. So there's been quite a lot of work done with Nuri and Faith in terms of what that might look like, but not off the table, just that we have to be considerate of that in terms of the rollout for this next year, if interested. That's me. Any questions?
Thanks, Kirsty. And I might add that when the Teacher Gully folk came up and visited us, the young people, their energy, their enthusiasm, their passion and their commitment to this program was clearly, the way forward as far as dealing with the youth and sort of having them engaging in the manner in which they did was really commendable. I have Russell, John, and then Don Barrett. So Russell.
Sorry, Bim.
Yep.
Sorry, could I just interject? Kirsty, can you just make sure you've unshared your screen, please? Thank you.
Okay. Russell.
As you might know, my daughter was in YAC, and one of the benefits of YAC was the interaction with YACSA, and then an opportunity to participate in Youth Parliament, which was really, really important to her. So I just wonder how some of those opportunities will continue on, bearing in mind that there are an inordinate number of leadership programs in schools. I took the liberty of showing this presentation to my daughter, and one of the points she made was that in her time in YAC, it was largely a group of people who didn't get leadership opportunities through sporting clubs that gravitated towards YAC. So it was the non-sporty types. So that's why it ends up looking clicky. So I think the other question I've got is not only what are the ongoing opportunities, how does it interface with a whole bunch of other leadership programs, including youth environment, which you might recall a young woman from Newry High School got a governor's, like an Australian medal equivalent for youth out of that program. So, there's extraordinary opportunities for young people. Are we competing in an overcrowded space already? The Yak did something else for a bunch of people who didn't get the top of the tree youth opportunities. And of course, you'll wipe out all the people from the southern end of the Barossa, which I think is disappointing. Thank you.
Are you happy for me to? Thanks.
Yeah.
Yep, sure. I think that definitely the comment in terms of the young people that came onto the Yak were not the sporty type. Definitely, we've had a lot of feedback over probably the last 5 years, if not more, in terms of that group, or not that group, but that cohort of young people across the whole of our council, where there are a lot of sporting opportunities for young people in the Valley, and the young people who aren't sporty and are looking elsewhere don't really have a great deal of opportunities. So I think that's a fair comment. I don't know that it necessarily then ended up being young people in that group because of that, in terms of that. I think what really happens is, and we were really focusing on Newry High at the time as well. Faith wasn't really engaging greatly in the Yak in later times. We had some in my time. I think there's a few things in terms of what we would be providing that other leadership programs don't, and I don't think we should be competing, and I don't think that we would be. Definitely some of the other leadership programs in the schools are very much school-based and focused. I'd hope that this would give the ability of those young people that aren't necessarily fully engaged in school, potentially doing flow, an opportunity to be doing a leadership program which they wouldn't have an opportunity to do before, and that also gives them the credits that they need to graduate. So I think that there's some value in the SACE credit system that some of the other leadership programs don't have. Also, a lot of the leadership programs are very much focused on a particular area, so environment or the ambassador program, and I think they will have value, whereas this would be a much broader kind of presentation or proposition. I think that there would be value in the way that we link in with them. So Brooke's done a lot of work talking with obviously Foundation Barossa and their youth program that they're started to engage with. Bush Gardens are about to do some engagement with young people as well, and how we work all together so that they're interacting with each other but not doing the same thing. So I think that there's some value in that. So I'm assuming that your comment, sorry, Russell, around excluding the Southern Barossa area is more in terms of us not engaging with the other schools that are further afield.
Oh, yeah. And it is when our daughter was involved in Yak, it was an hour's round trip plus an hour for a couple of hours for an adult hanging around Newry waiting for the program to finish.
Yeah. Definitely a problem and a concern, and that's why we've put some money in towards transport, whether that's a taxi service or we're utilising some kind of council bus. So we have considered that as well, because I would be really encouraging of our Southern Barossa young people to definitely get involved. So again, it's going to be a little bit of trial and error for the first year in terms of where the gaps are and how we're pitching it and who's coming along. And also I think that the value, and this has certainly been the case with the TTG program, is that it's that whole word of mouth situation. So, getting it started is a little hard. People start to get involved, they get excited about it, they spread the word. And because there's that kind of, I guess, authenticity in terms of the SACE accreditation and also the application process, it gives a level of, I guess, seriousness to the leadership program as well, where we haven't really had that in the past. So,
Kirsty, sorry, I've got a couple more questions.
Oh, yeah, sorry.
And I'll just keep us on the time schedule. We've got another guest waiting. So John Angus, and then Don, and then Carla.
Thanks, Bim. Kirsty, thanks for your presentation. I just noticed one slide. You indicated that you were going to allow participants to essentially set their own agenda. And as a person who has learnt to do as he's been told most of his life, I think there is a great deal of merit in actually not being too loose and letting the participants dictate their own ends, because sometimes they actually don't know what's good for themselves, and even, you know, bearing a bit of pain or a bit of embarrassment or a bit of stress can make them better. So I just want to explore how deeply you are allowing them to set their own agenda, or whether it is actually reasonably structured and constructive. Thanks.
Yeah, thank you. So in terms of the drivers in this premise, it is that young people are feeling like they're engaging in the program. They have a vested interest in what's coming out of it, but the structure itself is quite structured. So there is an agenda that's set by the youth coordinator in terms of the term. We have a theme already around that. What we're encouraging in terms of this, and this is what's been done across a number of best practice youth leadership orientations, is that the young people within the theme get to have a conversation as a group and work out what particular area they want to focus on. So it's still structured in terms of the theme, and there will be some ideas around that, and they'll have to come up within a sitting in terms of what that might look like for a whole term. And that's where we're kind of encouraging that engagement. What that also does is ensure that the young people are focusing, although they've got the theme set for them, what might actually be the pinch point for young people in the community at the time. So it does have structure, but they still have some kind of say in terms of where they're leading it. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, yep. Thank you very much. Thanks.
Don, then Carla. Don, you need to turn your mic on, sir. No, still haven't got you, Don. Now we have. Now we got you.
Excellent. Thanks very much, Kirsty. Very good presentation. Just a few observations, and I pick up on what Russell said about the southern end. I'll just put a bit of flesh on the bones for you, and why I'm a little bit disappointed in a way, in as much as I drive a school bus, and out of the Burbot High School, every day I see 13 buses pull in and out of the place. Now, I know there's 2 buses pull out go over to Williamstown back each day. Both are 56-seat buses. So that's, doing my maths real quick, 112 kids straight away out of Williamstown. And they're factual figures. I can back them up. They're Link SA drivers. I know exactly how many on it. That's not including the buses then come through Mount Pleasant, Springton, and other areas. Has there been any thought to reversing the way things are done, rather than kids going all the way over to Newry and just the top end, but some of the staff come out to the outlying areas and rotate round where it is actually delivered. So you might come down and actually do some delivery down here. You might be surprised at some of the missed opportunities, because from memory, I think Carla used to go to Burbot High School. I think she was in class with one of my sons from memory. I'm just showing my age now, but I just don't know whether those things have been explored or not. So because I've seen these leadership programs from the very highest to the highs to the lowest to the lows, in as much as a few years ago, a lady over this way, she got on the governor's leadership program and she set up the Torrens Valley Education Fund. And with that, the young and up-and-coming young kids, they were given a bursary through any children that were captured through the Torrens Valley. And that went well into the Barossa Council area. And at the same time, then they were high achievers, and then whether they were going to TAFE or uni or wherever they're going, they were then given quite a considerable sum of money, and then you find the university was back it up. But then I would then drive a bus all the way up to the Flinders Ranges, and I'd disappear with kids for 8 days on Operation Flinders, and giving them direct leadership on a daily basis. And I sort of just think we're missing a bit here by just having the top end. So that's all I've got to say. And thank you very much, and very good presentation.
Kirsty, before I'll just put Carla on, because we're just starting to run out of time.
Sorry, we might actually like to reply to that one.
Okay.
absolutely understand the comment. The reality is there's not one staff member that won't go south, north, east or west. And the inference that we won't do so is just wrong. We will do it. So what I want to do, and what I've seen in Kirsty's presentation where Joe's going, is we will make it happen no matter how it happens. And I guess what we're trying to do here is come up with a leadership model that works across the whole area. So I just want to make it really, really clear, no matter what works, we'll be absolutely supported by your staff, by your executive, and it's just really a product of some minor budget. I understand the comment, Don, about Operation Flinders, and Operation Flinders has actually been explored a few times by this council as the collective, and Operation Flinders actually has very minimal impact for those that are leaders in our community, whereas this could have an impact for 11, 15, 20 different people every year. So Don, absolutely take it on board, understand what you're saying, and we can tweak things to make sure that that is clear in the communication. But there's not one staff member that won't go anywhere outside north, south, west, east. Thank you.
Carla.
I'm going to pick up where Russell and Don left off there, unsurprisingly. But before I say that, I want to preface my comments by saying that, I think this presentation has been really great. I love the program and the concepts that have been put forward, and really do appreciate the work that has gone into that so far. I mean, it's evident that there's a lot of work that's been put into that so far. But like Don and Russell, I am concerned about the southern end missing out again. As Don mentioned, I went to Birdwood High School, and I've got that first-hand experience of having missed out on a lot of opportunities just by fortune or misfortune of living in Williamstown. Going to Birdwood, there were opportunities that would arise that were from the Hills End, which we weren't able to participate in because we were not from the Hills. And likewise, there was so much stuff happening in the northern end of the Barossa, and we really didn't get to participate in that. For whatever reason, it just wasn't there. So going forward, I guess I'd really like to see more on how the Southern Barossa is going to be integrated into this program, how you're going to engage with the youth of the Southern Barossa, because I think that's really important. There's so many down here, and I feel like a lot of them don't feel that they're part of this region. And, we've got so much talent down here. Russell's daughter's one of them. So, I'd like to see us pulling more of these people back into the Barossa and trying to keep them here, as well as encouraging them to return. I get what you're saying around, needing to try the program and needing to see where it goes. But, I mean, for people at the southern end of the Barossa, we're always at the end of the line as far as that goes. All these things seem to get trialled in the north before it comes to this end. So that's just my feedback as a Southern Barossa youth.
Martin,
I'm going to dispute it strongly, because at the end of the day, this is a Barossa program.
Yeah.
And if you fund it to be a Barossa program so it can be achieved, it will be achieved. And I agree with what Don and Carla are saying, and I support Russell, because obviously there's a great leader that actually comes from the Southern Barossa. Anyhow, I thought we were one Barossa, which actually links into the previous conversation.
But having said that, Martin,
we will
the focus
actually,
is on Urian faith.
No, but we can make it expand based on what you give us as an allocation. So I think it's a great program. I hear what you're saying, and I think we can make it even better, but it is a product of what we can achieve with the allocations provided. And the intent of what Kirsty's brought to us and Brooks brought to us and today is exactly what you're asking for. That's my
yeah. Look, I agree, and that was what I was going to say. Look, at the end of the day, you guys set the budget, or we set the budget, and if we want 2 youth leaders or 3 youth leaders and 3 different groups, well, that's a decision you got to make, and we've got to fund it. So, yeah, the program's great. How we deliver it is something we need to work through at budget time and see where we go from there. Don, I'll give you one last quick one, and no, it's not. Sorry, it's David Hayvick, and then we better move on. No, you're still off, David. Now you're on.
I'm on now.
Yep.
Thanks very much. Excellent presentation. One question, only a short one. Is there any form of assessment done for the children or the kids doing this course? Now, where do they go after? How successful are they? Do they go to jobs, or do they succeed in some other form? Because I believe in success and some form of assessment at the end of the day. That's not to pick faults or anything like that, but unless you know how you're going with your assessments, you don't know how to improve.
Kirsty, can you wrap up, please?
Yeah, sure. Definitely, there is an assessment process in terms of what they're producing each term that has to be done in terms of getting SACE credits. So that's worked closely with the school, and that's probably why we've talked about Nuri and Faith, because obviously they have agreed to do the SACE accreditation. So there's definitely feedback the whole way through. They have tasks that they have to achieve. In terms of jobs, it would depend on their age in terms of what they're doing, but it's great for their CV anyway to show leadership and where that might lead afterwards. I just wanted to round it off quickly, Carla, just so that just in terms of the Southern Barossa, we definitely engage with the young people down there. We have the best turnout of any when we do our cinema nights down at Williamstown, and we fund a program with Birdwood High in terms of young people with business accreditation. So we do a little bit with them. We just haven't engaged with the SACE part of that yet, but it's open to anybody. That's the most important part.
Thanks, Kirsty.
Thank you.
Setting the foundation and a way forward for the members to consider. Thank you.
Thank you very much. See you later. Bye.
Members will now move on to the Gorla River Flood Management Authority review, and welcome Jeff Tate. I see, Jeff, you've been sitting there for a while, so you've got a fair understanding of some of our Barossa use projects, so I'll hand over to you now, sir.
Thank you, Mayor. Can everybody hear me okay?
Yep.
Yes? Yep.
Great.
Thank you. Thank you for the invitation to provide this briefing tonight. Some of you may recall that I attended in your chamber on the 1st of July as the first of 6 briefings and workshops at that stage on the review of the Gorla River Floodplain Management Authority, the governance and funding arrangements. So you're the first cab off the rank that night. You're the first cab off the rank in the second round. So these briefings are meant to happen between now and Christmas. I'll just load up my slides. I understand that you do have copies of them. It's not right. Sorry about that. Okay. Can we see that?
Yes. Yep. Very good.
Okay. Thank you. So I can't see any of you except for you, Mayor. So I'll just talk to my screen. Pretend that I'm talking to the audience. So yes, I'm here to provide this briefing tonight. As I said a moment ago, I'll be providing briefings to all 6 councils that are members of the authority, and that's intended to be happening between now and actually the 1st of December is the targeted completion of that. The program for tonight, I'll go fairly quickly through the first few slides. You've seen some of this material before. The real business, I think, as you guys reminded me last time I was there, starts at number 3. We'll start talking about the funding arrangements. So I'll take you through the principles. We discussed some of these principles last time, just to then show you how they've been applied, and then go through where the funding arrangements currently are and the sorts of models that identified during this project. So just in terms of the brief, essentially it's to look at how things are operating at the moment, future challenges, policy impacts of other governments and so on. Number 3 is really the key bits of it, to look at the options for addressing challenges, including the advantages and disadvantages of both current and alternate models of governance and funding. So it's largely around governance and funding, and then provide a written report. The project stages, don't need to go through every one of them, but when I spoke to you last time, we're at stage 3. We're now at stage 5. So there is a draft final report that has been provided to the authority. It's going to the board meeting on the 15th of October, as I understand. So we're now in stage 5, which is the second round of council engagement. And the idea is to brief you on the findings in relation to governance, and that's recapping on the previous briefing, and on funding. What I thought I'd do this time, last time I sort of led up to where things were heading, but with this presentation tonight, given that we only have 30 minutes, I thought I'd start with the recommendations and work through from there. And I've broken the recommendations into 3 different sections. The first one is in relation to governance. Now, there's nothing in here that is different to what I presented back on the 1st of July. These are the same recommendations. Continue as a regional subsidiary under Section 43 of the Local Government Act. Continue to have the same board membership that you have now. Do need to look at the combined staff appointments between the 6 councils to make sure that you're covering all the relevant skills as set out in the charter. I think in particular you don't have a finance person there. And number 4 was, at the moment, the charter allows members and deputy members to attend and the deputy members to speak at meetings. They can't vote, clearly, but they do have the right to speak in their own right. That potentially, as I pointed out last time, that potentially you have 25 people at a meeting, two board members from each council plus 2 deputies. By 6 is 24 plus independent chair. So just suggesting that be looked at again, and maybe there are other ways of allowing a deputy member to speak with the right of them, with the approval of the meeting or something like that. It's not the biggest issue in the agenda, but one that just in terms of reasonable sized board as it is with 13 people. The 5th recommendation is in relation to relationships. Last time in the draft report on governance, I had put this as seeking state government people, this is at the officer level, this is the bureaucratic level, to join with you on a strategy advisory committee. That's one option. When I went back and reviewed what I'd written and had some feedback about this, the point here is not so much the form of that, of the building relationships, but it's the fact that that you do, in my opinion, need to build those relationships further. You have some connections, obviously, with ministers, other members of parliament, and so on. This would supplement that. So this is intended to be making sure that people within the government agencies understand your issues, and they're also people who can advise you as well in relation to strategies, your plans, and also pursuing external funding. Just on this point, during the project, this point of not being heard by state government came up a lot when I did the interviews with the board members. We did organise a workshop with state government agencies. We had 10 people from 9 different agencies attend, and they each presented along with people from the authority as well. So the ball has started rolling in terms of structuring something around this, and I know there's interest from within the state government bureaucracy about taking it further, and something may come of that in the next little while, I would imagine. So that's recommendation number 5, slightly different to what it was in the draft report. Moving into the funding side of it, and these are all new recommendations. So this funding part of it is new. The governance material that's in this final draft of the report, the governance stuff is as I presented in the first report, with that subtle change about the relationships. So what I'm saying here, recommendation number 6, is that the authority and the councils consider 4 funding model options. I'm going to step you through those in a moment, what they are. that are set out in the report. The starting point for that is to look at the funding principles, and we touched on them last time, but I'll expand them a bit further. I'll show those in a second. And then the potential scenarios for modelling, and suggesting that where possible you use your own staff, that's financial engineering staff for the constituent councils. And then of these, flagged option 7 is highlighted in yellow. That's the one, in my own assessment of the options against the principles, that's the one that had the highest score. But again, it needs to be tested through modelling. Then recommendation number 7 is for the authority to develop and implement a clear resource strategy for achieving external funding, including consideration of a broker to identify and pursue funding opportunities. The point there being that sometimes it's easier for a third party to be working between a body like yours and government agencies to help to build that the path through various funding programs and so on. So that's the recommendations. Just to back up on those recommendations then, the funding principles, you've seen some of these before. Number 1 is simplicity, that it's easy to understand what the funding formula is. It makes sense to people. Number 2 is that it's transparent. You can actually trace things through the formula that's used. Number 3 is fairness, and that's the extent to which a non-affected person. So there are 6 councils involved. I've heard 6 different versions of fairness on this, I have to say. But if a non-affected person, a disinterested party is another way of putting it, what they would regard as the arrangements as being fair. Objective measures, where possible, base your funding decisions around objective measures rather than subjective ones. Behaviour change, so that the funding arrangements should hopefully bring about changes in behaviour that could lead to less risk of flooding, or actions that reduce flood damage. So if it's reduce the risk of flooding, such as by reducing flows of water into the river during times of flows that lead to floods, or actions that reduce the damage, such as building above the flood level, or those that allow for a lower standard of flood protection. So the behaviour change principle here is intended to try to encourage that other things happen apart from the sort of traditional approaches to flood mitigation. So if we can nip some things in the bud, reduce flows from hitting the floodplains and so on, then so much the better. So behaviour change is an important principle. The 6th one is to adjust that the funding arrangements should adjust over time to reflect changing circumstances. So that's the funding model itself or its application would change to meet changed circumstances. A point that was made during the interviews with the board representatives and the councils was that you have one funding formula at the moment, and it's applied to everything. It doesn't take account of changing circumstances. So, and I think that's a really important point. So it's included here as a principle. Number 7 is that contributors to flows pay, that some responsibility on the upper catchment communities to meet the cost of reducing flooding, even if it's outside their council area. And number 8 is that beneficiaries pay. And obviously, we understand that some areas and property owners benefit more than others. So they're the 8 principles. The other question that came up in this was whether there should be one formula as you have now, or whether it should be done project by project. So what I've done here is 3 columns here. What's the approach? It's either a universal formula, it's a single formula, or a project by project approach. Then I've just listed the advantages and disadvantages. So with the current approach, which is a universal formula applied to all projects, it's known. So you've lived with it, so you do know about it. You know how it works. So there is some benefit in that, I think. It could possibly slightly change in the formula, but it is known. Likewise, it doesn't require that you devise a new formula for each project and the argy-bargy that goes with that. And thirdly, it can potentially be identified to a range of different funding models. It's fairly easy to apply to several of the funding models that were identified. Disadvantages, difficult to see how it's fair with individual projects. And I do note that up until now, the approach has been largely, for the authority, has been largely project by project. So that becomes, I think, a difficulty with this universal formula. Less responsive to changing circumstances over time, because it's in particular the one you have now, it's been fixed for a long time. Less flexibility to allow for potential variances in relation to benefits and beneficiaries. So there are some pretty heavy disadvantages. Project by project, advantage of greater transparency with the alignment of funding principles, greater transparency about where the costs and benefits lie, and also can encourage consideration of other beneficiaries and project outcomes and approaches. The downsides for that are it requires a new formula to be researched, negotiated and agreed for each project, and that's in itself can be challenging for 6 councils to agree, and it doesn't necessarily apply with all of the funding models that were brought forward. The working group of the board determined that they quite strongly had a view that it should be a project by project basis rather than sticking with what you currently have, which is a single formula. Okay, so the funding models, again, so there are 8 listed here, 1A, 1B through to 7, but 8 of them. The ones highlighted in yellow are the 4 that were selected and put forward in the report as potentials to pursue. 1A is basically the current model that you have. It's the default status quo. There is provision in the charter for the authority to go outside that formula for projects over $1 million in any one year. But so far, all of the work that you've done has been under that particular formula. 1B is an adjusted version of that. And I'll show you a slide in a moment that's like a working sheet on how that would be applied. Number 2, which I haven't carried forward, would be equal contributions by all councils. Number 3 is a drainage charge equivalent. And I'll show you how that works. It's not the authority can't impose a drainage charge across the area, but it could calculate the amount to be paid by each council based on the amount that would be collected through a drainage charge if it was applied across the whole catchment of the river in the 6 councils. Number 4 was proportion in each council area of the impervious surfaces in the catchment that leads to more runoff. Number 5 was flows into the river from each council area. Number 6 was the proportion of benefits received, and number 7 was a combination of those. So 1A, 1B, 3 and 7 were the ones that I've recommended be considered. Just in terms of how you might actually make these, how you might apply them, and this diagram's in the report. So this is 1B. This is the adjusted status quo, if you like. So across here, it's the different elements. So at the moment, the current formula is made up of a bit of the catchment area in each council area, the length of the river in each council area, future costs avoided, and ability to pay. Now, catchment area and river length are both quite objective measures. They're known. They can be calculated. Future costs avoided is a bit more subjective. It requires some judgment. The ability to pay is, I think, quite subjective. So what I've done here is they're the elements across the top, the councils down the side, the 6 councils listed. And the idea with this is under each of these aspects, you would allocate as a group that a certain percentage of the formula comes from catchment area. A certain percentage of the formula comes from the river length, a certain percentage of the formula comes from the future cost avoided, and a certain percent comes from ability to pay. So, for instance, if it was divided by 4, that's 25%, 25%, 25 and 25, or 50, 20, 20, 10, whatever it is that you decide. You then simply allocate that part of the formula by the area of the catchment, and each council has a component of that catchment that comes in there. Likewise, with river length, you split the percentage here up into, depending on the length in each different council area. Future costs avoided, that is a calculation for each council about the costs that would be avoided in its area by doing works on the river flood mitigation. And ability to pay would be likewise, it's another calculation that you'd have to agree on as to how that would be applied. So that's so there's 1A is the existing formula. This is 1B, it's a variation on that. Like I say, it's the same 4 elements that you have now, but applied in quite a different way. The option 3 was the drainage charge equivalent I mentioned before, and essentially it would work like this. The authority would charge each council based on the amounts that would have been collected if it had been able to impose a drainage charge across the catchment. So it charges the councils. The council pays that amount to the back to the authority, and it recovers the amounts from ratepayers. And the ratepayers are charged. They're charged for this charge equivalent, drainage charge equivalent, either as part of the general rates or as a separate rate or charge. So if you took it from, if the authority had the ability to impose a drainage charge across the catchment, you'd go straight from there to there. So they'd be charging the ratepayers direct. They don't have that. They can't do that. They can charge the councils on the same basis, and the councils make their decision as to how they recover the money from their ratepayers. Okay, so that was option number 3. Then option number 7. This is the combination of flows and benefits. Again, the element. I've got here flows and benefits as the element, and then the councils down here. So this requires a fair bit of agreement between the councils. So at this point, you would have to make some agreement between flows and benefits. So this is the water in, this is who benefits. You'd make a decision about what percentage of the formula is to be allocated under this basis, what percentage under this. So it might be 10% 90 or 25 75. I don't think it'd be 50-50, but it could be. You might start there and work it through. So there's an agreement reached there. You then take this flows, the calculation. There's an amount per council, and that then gives you the percentage of the total of that percentage there that's applied to each council. That's for the flows side. For the benefits side, 3 different types of benefits that identified from the research. One is costs avoided. One is the increased development potential in an area, and the third one is increased property values. We'll come to those in turn. Cost avoided. 2 aspects as I see it. One is that every council has essentially a disposal path, if you like. The floodwaters from excess water from each council area ends up in the river. So there's a cost avoided. If that wasn't available, you'd have to find other ways of disposing of the water. The other cost avoided can be in relation to reduced flooding in your area. So that's again, this would be based on agreed percentage for costs avoided and agreed percentages per council for disposal path and reduced flooding. Increased development potential. This means potentially more land can be divided for residential development, or with primary production, it might be more structures and so on that help with primary production, or C&I, so PP is primary production, res is residential, C&I is commercial and industrial. So that would be from some calculation about the extent to which the works that are going to take place would increase the development potential in each council area. Increased property values, again, primary production, residential, commercial and industrial, refers to where if there is less flooding in an area, that is likely to lead to higher property values in that area. So this is relatively complex in terms of working your way through it, and it's particularly hard for you. I'm just dropping on you now like this, but I think there is merit in this, and I did an assessment of all four options against the principles, and this was the one that had the highest rating, and that's in the report. The ratings in the report. Again, it's the most complex as well. I agree. I accept that. The next steps are that I said before, board meeting on the 15th of October. Council's responses will be requested for to the final report. So you have the final draft now, and then the final report to be finalised. So we are targeting the 1st of December for that to happen. So, Mayor, that's my presentation. I'll try to stick to your timelines.
Thanks, Jeff. That's an enormous task you've engaged in. There was a key word that you've sort of highlighted all the way through, and that still comes back to that very important task.
Mr. Mayor.
What's agreed? Agreed?
Yeah.
Apologies, Mr. Mayor. Jeff,
Yep.
Can you just see if you can unshare?
Oh, yeah,
Okay.
just share your screen. Thanks. So we can see a few more. Yep. Thanks. Yep.
How's that? Right.
Thanks,
Yeah.
Jeff.
So as I said, that agreed bit will become an interesting debate. I had a fairly lengthy conversation on the weekend with Minister Spears about the Gorla floodplain and its future and other things along the way. So as I said, Jeff, it's a difficult task. We still don't believe we should be in there, but we won't shoot you because you've got a task to do. Martin and then Councillor Angus.
Thanks, Mr. Mayor, and thanks, Jeff. I think Bim just mentioned then that you're only producing an outcome of the structure that you've been asked. There's a couple of things in there I'm really interested to explore. So we don't need to do it now, but we can catch up at some stage in the future. But we understand water flows down the hill. It has impacts on how we manage that. And this council has been extremely proactive in managing that. Not an argument you haven't already heard. It's really interesting to try and factor in things like property values and cost avoidance, etc., etc. And I'd argue for us that's zero. So the model might be quite interesting for us. I think the whole issue comes back to the purpose of why GRFMA was created. And I've been doing lots of reading. GRFMA was created to deal with an immediate issue with a floodplain nearly 15 years ago. And there's some really interesting legal advice on my files. The fundamental purpose has been achieved. And I realise that you are being engaged to do a particular governance piece of work. And I'm probably going to ask you something that is a little bit left field. Why are we continuing to use a model that won't achieve the outcome and push costs elsewhere in our local government areas? The fundamental thing I'm going to have to do here with Gary is to come up with a recommendation to council as what we do in the long term. It seems GRFMA has completely missed the purpose on these reviews. The first one was about the governance and the second one was about the financial model. I get your financial models. I have no issues with the financial models, but the purpose seems to be missed. I'm wondering if you can give me some thoughts around that.
Look, you're right. My brief was very clearly to look at the governance arrangements, which I did in the first stage, and then the funding arrangements between the councils, and so that's what I've done. The purpose thing, there's quite a reasonable section in the report about stormwater management in Australia, and South Australia in particular. And I realise this is it's a river. It's not directly related always to stormwater management, but the agreement between the Local Government Association and the state government that was entered into in 2006, as I recall, and then a subsequent agreement in 2013, and I've referenced those in the report. It sets out that stormwater includes. It's got a sort of a definition in there which includes water in rivers, watercourses flowing across land. It's not just stormwater in an urban setting, because I think that's how some people would see it. So it was an important definition, I think. So that, to my mind, brings local government into the equation. The question of, the authority was formed, I think, in 2000 or 2002 or somewhere around there. And at that stage, I assume there was a lot of consideration as to what was to be achieved through it. And the idea of working at sort of like a catchment level, if you like, rather than a individual council level, was, it's a pretty powerful concept. I think for you, the question is going to be around to what extent. First of all, if you've done works that reduce the flows into the river, then option 7 that I've flagged for you should pick that up, because it's got the flows coming in. It should show in the flows, the relative proportion of flows into the river. The question, though, is, do you accept that you have some responsibility for what happens below your council area? To me, that's the big question. And I think when I addressed you on the 1st of July, Mayor, you made your views very clear, and I think you did as well, Martin, as I recall. So I'm not here to say you anything other than I think I'm pretty pleased with the way the funding options came out, because the funding arrangements between councils are hard to find. They're not. There's no conventional wisdom about this stuff. Yours is one of the early ones. The current one, it's one of the early ones. But increasingly, it is about where the flows come from and who benefits. I think that's the latter. That's more contemporary thinking about the funding arrangements between councils.
John Angus, you got a question, John?
Yes, thanks, Ben. Part of me says I should probably say nothing because I might regret what I'm going to say, but Jeff, you have an unenviable position to put to the participating councils. And when you posed the question, do we care what happens to our stormwater after it leaves our area? Well, yes, we do, but we don't have any control really over how much rain falls and how much runs off You know, try as we may. I mean, I saw one of your slides says, you know, we should reduce the amount of inflows. Well, that's all very well, and I think we have tried to do that with the Newry flood mitigation scheme. But it seems to me that what you're proposing here is like, we might as well ask the residents of Thredbo to contribute to a flood event in Gorla, because it's all the same kind of, you know, the rain falls or the snow melts and the water does some damage, might be 100 miles downstream, might be 3,000 miles downstream. The fact of the matter is that there are activities that are taking place that are totally unsuitable at some times, and people will be flooded from time to time. And the second thing is the river needs a good clean out, but there doesn't seem to be any talk about actually, not that I've heard, of actually doing some earthworks to clear the chokes that obviously occur the length of it from Gorla onwards. So I'm really concerned that we're going to be lumbered with, you know, contributing to things that should never have happened in the first place, that aren't our doing. And it's not that I don't care about those people. I think, you know, they have a right to make a living on the banks of the Gorla River, but they also have a responsibility to realise that, you know, they're in a flood zone, and occasionally, you know, bad things will happen. So I'm pretty concerned. So I guess it's not a question; it's more of a comment. And I'll just finish by saying I don't envy your job.
Thank you.
Kathy Schilling.
No, I just said, well said, John. I think
sorry, I see that now. Yes, got it. It's come up. Any other questions? I guess as far as all of this is concerned, Jeff, this is something that council will have a lot of deliberation about in the chamber. And look, appreciate you coming along and presenting the body of work that you've done to try to move it forward. But, you know, well, you know, my personal views, I just think that we've done our part over the years. We've got a huge part of our catchment, which is state forestry and SA waterland and all those other things associated with us. And all of that has runoff into the catchment. And so it's very hard to come up with something that's fair and consistent across the whole catchment area when other areas don't have the same level of Crown land and all those other things associated with it. But, you know, with all that said, as I said, I had a very interesting talk with Minister Spears, and that might be something I'll follow up a bit further with the elected members, along with our local member at some stage. Any other questions? Oh, Russell, you're there. Oh, hang on, there is a few more now. Martin and then David.
Thanks, Jeff. I echo the same thoughts. You're in a difficult engagement. But I'd just like a few quick words on your expected process from here.
Mine?
Yeah.
Well, let's be clear. I mean, I'm a consultant that was been engaged to produce some ideas for you, some other options to what you currently have, and to you know, talk about those in terms of their potential value compared to others. So the debate about who should or shouldn't be in the authority, or whether it should even be in existence, is, you know, quite clear. It's you know, it's a million miles outside my brief, and I didn't. You know, I went outside the project brief on the issue of working with the state government agencies, because I could see that there was a big gap in communication that was taking place. So I put myself out there on that, did a fair bit of work for you pro bono outside the project brief to achieve that. I'm not, there's I always think there's brave, there's crazy brave, and there's crazy. Now, to start a debate about who should or shouldn't be in the authority, for me, sits at the crazy end. I didn't tackle that. I won't tackle that. I have views about that, but they're my personal views. So I've approached this as an opportunity to look at some contemporary ways of, especially the funding. I think the governance stuff, for the moment, I think is fit for purpose, simply because you are still in this stage. Even after 20 years, you're in this sort of exploring stage still about purpose and who's involved and so on. It's a long time to be unclear about that, I have to say. So that part of it is so if we go for now, given that you're still trying to work through that, the governance stuff is appropriate. I think, in the future you might want to, if it still exists in the future, you might want to move into a specialist board that is focused on delivery. At the moment, you're still arm wrestling the funding arrangements, who's in, who's out, that sort of stuff. You don't want it to be too far away from you while that's going on. The board needs to be of the councils, in my opinion, not just for the councils, as if you appointed some independent people to it. So that's, I think that's reasonably clear, that part of it. The funding, you now have effectively 3 options to consider that you didn't have before. And I know, obviously I'm biased with it, but I've been able to sit back off this project for a few weeks now. It's a few weeks since I finished this draft report, and I've had time to to reflect on things and reread what's been written. And I think what I've put forward to you makes a lot of sense. I think I'm quite very comfortable with what I've written. I'm not sort of on an ego trip about that, but I have reflected on what I've done, and I think it's I think the options are good. They're useful. They're clear. They can help you if you look at, especially if it's option number 7, a bit complex to negotiate, but I think it's worth the effort of doing that. Do it project by project. You would very quickly see where the benefits are and who benefits the most, and that's where that's where the key money should come through. The question of whether you should contribute to flows, it wasn't, John, that it wasn't saying that you care. I don't mean don't care. I didn't mean that at all. It's just whether you feel you have some responsibility for doing something about that. That's what I meant. That's a key question for you. You seem to be close to an answer without actually finalising it. From what I can see, that's like a sort of like an endless debate at the moment that's going on. And I just want to make the point, I'm not part of that debate. I can't be. Personally, I don't want to be either. I'd be looking for a danger money for doing that sort of stuff.
No, thanks, Jeff. I think they're wise words, and I commend the work you've done. You've done what you've been asked to do, and you've done more.
Thank you.
Just a really difficult thing to navigate. So I think when we get to an end point here, I'll have another conversation outside the contract.
David Havey.
Yeah, just going on from what John said and what Jeff has said, we can control the water up here, and I think the council has done a good job from what I know. But how can we control other councils down the creek type of thing as to what they do? In other words, when the water goes through here, we've got no control over it. And then to hold someone up the river responsible, I don't think that doesn't work with me. Now, I was involved many years ago, about 15 years ago, when those floods were rampant down there. And I've still got some people I know down around Two Wells who say nothing's been done. And if we have another big downpour, they'll get flooded again.
Yeah.
After all these years. So the question is, what have those councils done? And I can recall a big flood at Globe Derby Park where the river went down the side there. I don't know whether you know about that one. And what had happened is that the outgoing river that went out to the sea had not been cleaned for many, many years, or maybe ever, and it just silted up. It only had about 1.5 meters from where the silt was before it went over the banks, and that's what happened.
Yeah.
And at the end of the day, after there was a coroner's inquest into it, they were made to clean the bloody creek out, which happened and fixed the problem. So there's a lot of work to be done down the bottom end, I think.
Yeah.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Russell? Turn your mic on, Russell. Thanks.
Jeff, thanks for your work. While we've got you here, I'm going to quote David O'Loughlin about the tax base that local government have, which is thought to be about 3.4% of all taxes. And also try and ask, why is it the case that you're saying that this 2006 agreement means that essentially local government is responsible for this whole thing? So in the funding arrangements, we, given the contribution that the feds make to some of the problems that we have, and some of the contributions that the state government makes, whether either it's land or it's infrastructure, whether it be roads or rail, and what have you, that actually act as choke points. I know it's beyond your brief, but how is it that we're not able to engage successfully with these agencies that in fact have more money and cause most of the problems? Thank you.
Look, the part of the my commentary in the report is that the system for managing stormwater, I remember explaining this last time, that it started off being all about flooding and flood control, and that goes back centuries, in the history of the world. It then moved into more of a multi-objective approach, which started to pick up on environmental issues, some recreation issues, some aesthetic issues. So if you, especially in an urban setting, people started to create water bodies that weren't there before for people to picnic by and those sorts of things. It's now moving slowly at the moment, as I see it, into a whole water cycle discussion. So it's a very unusual thing, isn't it, to have this type of water and that type of water. It's all water in the end. So you've got potable water, stormwater. So the discussion now, and again in the report, it talks about the Australian Productivity Commission report or a paper produced back in March this year, talking about the fact that stormwater management has not been subjected to the same economic principles, levers and so on, nor regulatory principles and levers as other types of water, like groundwater, lots of rules and regulations around it, potable water, wastewater, there's a lot of attention given to those, but not with stormwater. It's sort of the missing link in the water cycle debate. So what are the chances of that being reformed? I would have thought that there's a reasonable chance that there will be some significant reforms there, but there's a lot of existing arrangements in place. It's quite complex. It started with flood mitigation. It's now, multiple objective approach. And through all that, every time things have changed, there's another piece of legislation or a guideline or a rule or something. So it is so complex now to move forward. So it's not answering your question directly, Russ. I know where you're coming from, but it's a fundamental change in how things are done, not another layer over the top of it, in my opinion. I know in Victoria there's work taking place around how to bring all the different parties together in better ways to manage stormwater. But again, it's another layer of, it's another layer of complexity over the top, which with complexity comes cost as well. So I think the eventual answer is root and branch review of the whole thing around managing water holistically rather than separately. That's somewhat outside my brief, of course, but you know, you're looking forward. That's probably where you're better off trying to influence them.
Martin.
I think that's all outside our brief, Jeff, that last bit. Look, I just wanted to say one thing, that Jeff turned this around on the long weekend. We had a small spot, and I just want to thank him for the extra piece of work over the long weekend. Thanks, Jeff, for allowing us to have this conversation.
Right.
Yeah. Yes. Thanks, Jeff.
Thank you. Thanks, everybody.
And,
nice drop of rain up there, so you'll be happy.
Yeah. Yeah. All yes, very wet at the moment, which is good.
Yeah.
Okay. Thanks.
Okay. Thanks very much.
Your presentation and your involvement tonight.
Thank you.
Well, that wraps it up, members. We'll sort of stop the video now or the recording, I should say, and we'll catch you somewhere in a dry spot.